Lord, thank you for this day, this beautiful day that you've given to us, for the delight that it is to gather together with other believers, and for the privilege and the wonder that it is to study your word. As we do that here this morning in the book of Daniel, I pray that your spirit would work in our hearts so that we're able to grasp the things that Daniel was writing so many years ago, especially this chapter, which contains so much history now to us. I pray that you would help us to not only to grasp the events and the people and the places that were involved, but also to be able to see your handiwork throughout this entire chapter and through all the history. And for this, we give you thanks and praise today in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, Daniel chapter 11, if you're a Christian and you're also, if you happen to be a history buff or somebody that likes history, you should bookmark Daniel chapter 11. It is a very long chapter. It is also an extremely important chapter. Basically, what it does is it starts from the time of Daniel and then goes through several years, even centuries ahead in time to show what was going to happen from Daniel's time in the world. And what you find is you have a long string of events, of people and places and things that happened that incredibly were so accurate in being fulfilled in history that Bible critics for years have said it's impossible that this was written as prophecy. There's too many things that happened exactly as they were stated in this chapter that it had to be written after the events. Truth of the matter is, it wasn't. It was written before because God knew every one of these events and every one of these people and every one of these places. And so what he's doing is detailing and laying out a very detailed timeline, if you will, starting from Daniel's time and fast forwarding through several centuries. And so we're going to do a little bit of review this morning, and then we'll get back into the timeline where we left off last week. But before we do that, right at the end of our time together last week, someone asked what the capitals of these empires were. And I mentioned the capital at that time, the southern kingdom, and we don't see the name Egypt in this chapter. What we see is the king of the south. Well, that is Egypt. And the capital at that time, now, when Daniel wrote the book of Daniel, the capital of Egypt had not changed yet. It was Memphis, just like Memphis, Tennessee. Memphis had been the capital of Egypt for ever since the time of the pharaohs. But when Alexander, remember we studied Alexander the Great, when Alexander took over Egypt, he captured Egypt and incorporated it into his empire. One of the first things that he did was he had a city built, and it was a beautiful city, and it was built with the intention that it would become the capital. And so it did become the capital. And Alexander just searching for a name. What do I call this city? Alexander. So he said, I know, I'll call it Alexandria. He named a city after himself. That then became, in Alexander's time and going forward, which is what we're doing in chapter 11, was the capital city of Egypt. The story of Syria is a little bit different, a little bit more complex. Today, the capital of Syria is Damascus. Hasn't always been the capital city. In fact, from about 300 BC to about 600 AD, the capital of Syria was Antioch. And if you've read and studied the New Testament, that should be a familiar name to you, because in the book of Acts, chapter 13, when there was a church in Syria that God called to send missionaries out, and the missionaries they sent were Paul and Barnabas. Well, the church was in the city of Antioch, and so that church was in the capital of what then was the capital of Syria. But prior to that, Syria today, which is a country, was part of a larger empire. It was known as the Seleucid Empire, and it was named after Seleucus, who was the first general of Alexander that took control of that area when Alexander died. And so the name of the city that was the capital then, again, here's a guy that wanted a capital city named after him. It was Seleucia. So it went from Seleucia to most of what we see in chapter 11 was Antioch, and then afterwards, and today, it's Damascus. Okay, so chapter 11, again, and we'll do a little bit of review here. And remember, every single one of these verses, when you read the verse, what the verse is saying is, this is what's going to happen in the future. And every single one of these verses has come to pass, which is not surprising because it was written by God, prophecy. What is amazing, though, all the names, all the people, all the places, all the events came to pass in exactly the order that they were laid out in chapter 11, which is an incredible thing. So chapter 11, verse 2, we looked at some of these verses already. Chapter 11 and verse 2, what was prophesied here to Daniel was that a Persian king, remember, when Daniel came to Babylon, the Babylonian Empire was in power. While he was there for seven decades, while he was there, that power shifted and the Medo-Persian Empire took over. And so when Daniel started, it was in the Babylonian Empire. Before he died, it became the Persian Empire. Verse 2 of chapter 11 says, a Persian king will arise who will go to war against Greece. So verse 2, he says, I tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a fourth will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong through his riches, he will arouse a whole empire against the realm of Greece. And what we saw was 480 BC, there was a king by the name of Xerxes who attacked King Leonidas at the Battle of Thermopylae. The battles had movies written about it, and that was a Persian victory. Even though if you've seen the movie, I think it was called The 300, which talked about the stand that the Greeks took at Thermopylae. They held off the massive Persian army for a week, but eventually the Persians broke through. And so there was a Persian victory at Thermopylae, exactly as that verse foretold. And then we come to verse 3, and what Daniel's being told here is, but even though that happens, a powerful king will then take over. So verse 3, a mighty king will arise and rule with great authority and do as he pleases. And that was none other than Alexander. 330 BC, Alexander conquered the Persian Empire. And then in verse 4, it tells us that Alexander's empire would be divided. Verse 4 says, as soon as he has arisen, he wasn't king very long. As soon as he has arisen, his kingdom will be broken up, parceled out toward the 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants. His son never got to reign, nor according to his authority which he wielded. He didn't have a choice who would become the kings. For his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others besides them. And so Alexander's main generals divided up the whole kingdom among themselves, and each took a little piece of the pie, so to speak. But of all those kings, only 2 really are significant to us. and that is the king that settled in became the Seleucid Empire up in the north, which is now Syria, and the king that went down south and took control there, which is Egypt. And so those two empires, the Seleucid Empire in Syria, the Egyptian Empire in Egypt, they will battle back and forth for centuries, once again with Israel in the middle. And so the general that took control up in Syria was a guy by the name of Seleucus. The general that took control down in Egypt was a guy by the name of Ptolemy. And so his empire was divided up. Alexander was only 32 years when he died. He died very young. And so his empire was now divided up. Verse 5 predicts that a king in Egypt will be overshadowed by a subordinate. So verse 5 says, then the king of the south will grow strong. King of the south was Ptolemy, who was a king in Egypt. The king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, meaning a subordinate, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be a great dominion indeed. So the prediction here in verse 5 is that Ptolemy in the south is going to grow strong, and he will end up with a subordinate who becomes stronger than him. And that's exactly what happened. In 309 BC, after there was a civil war, after Alexander died, these generals got together and decided who was going to take what piece of the Greek Empire. But they had battles. There were civil wars. After civil war, Ptolemy became the king in Egypt. Seleucus then was, so here's Ptolemy in the south, here's Seleucus in the north. Up in the north, there were people attacking Seleucus. So what did he do? He flees, and he goes down south. He joins Ptolemy's army. So now you have Ptolemy, who is the king. Seleucus comes in as his prince, which is exactly what this verse says. But then the Seleucid Empire eventually became more powerful than the Egyptian Empire. And so this subordinate, this prince, actually raised in ascendancy. Seleucus became more powerful than Ptolemy. Then we come to verse 6. This was intriguing. It predicts that years later, a daughter of a southern king will marry a northern king. A daughter of a southern king will marry a northern king. So you have this powerful empire up in the north in Syria, Seleucus, and this also powerful, not quite as powerful empire down in the south, Ptolemy in Egypt. And he's figuring, I've got to do something to manipulate things so that I can get control over Syria. And so what he did was he called his daughter Bernice and said, sweetheart, I've got a job for you. You're going to go marry the king of Syria, or the king of the Seleucid Empire. And that's exactly what happened. In 252 BC, Antiochus II, so now Seleucus he died, his son Antiochus II took over. Antiochus II divorces his wife. Her name was Laodice. He divorces his wife. He marries Ptolemy II's daughter, Bernice. And so you have the king of the south sends his daughter up to the north. Antiochus marries his daughter, divorces his wife, marries his daughter. Everything is going along very well according to the king of the south. And then the king of the south in 246 BC, he dies. When he dies, his son, which is Bernice, remember Bernice's up in the north now, she's married to the king Antiochus. Her brother takes over as king down in Egypt. So when Ptolemy II dies, Ptolemy III becomes king, and he invades Syria to save his sister. Why does his sister need saved? Because when Ptolemy III dies, you have Antiochus that's up here in Syria married to Ptolemy's daughter, He dies. Antiochus in Syria says, doesn't do me any good anymore to have a daughter of the Egyptian king because the Egyptian king's dead. And so he divorces Bernice and remarries Laodice, his first wife. That's what you call a bad situation. Because when Laodice remarried Antiochus, she was a woman scorned. And she figured, I'm going to settle accounts. And so she began to clean house. She had her husband killed. She had Bernice killed. She had Bernice's son killed. She had all the people that came from Egypt up to Syria, Seleucia, with Bernice. They were all killed too. They were all assassinated. So, verse 7 then. Verse 7 predicts. Let me see. Did I miss a verse? Verse 6. Oh, after some years they will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. That was Bernice marrying the king of the north. But she will not return her power or position of power, nor will he remain in power. They were both killed. But she will be given up along with those who brought her in. All of her entourage were killed, and the one who sired her as well as he who supported her in those times. So all the Egyptians up there are eliminated. Verse 1 there predicts that a relative of the daughter of the king of Egypt, the one that went up and married the king of Seleucia, of Syria, and the one that got killed by the wife that came back into the picture, it predicts that a relative of the daughter of the king of Egypt will arise against Syria, verse 7. But one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place, and he will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. So in 246 BC, once again, Ptolemy II dies. Ptolemy III becomes king, and Ptolemy III invades Syria to save his sister. So there's Bernice. She hasn't died yet. Bernice is up there. He knows things are going to fall apart up there because his father died, and that king divorced this guy's sister, married his first wife again. So Ptolemy III sends his army up there, and he attacks. He invades Syria to save his sister. But by the time he got there, she was killed. And so now he seeks revenge. He attacks and defeats the Syrians, and then he kills Laodice. So things didn't work out too well for her either. He returned to Egypt about 245 BC, and then verse 8 predicts that when he returns to Egypt, he will do so with everything he carts back from Seleucia, verse 8. Also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold, he will take into captivity to Egypt, which he did. And he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. And so there, for several years went by, and there weren't any battles back and forth between them. But then in verse 9 predicts that there will be an attempt at revenge by Syria. So here's what happened. The king of the south, he goes up there. All those people up there have been killed by Laodice. The king of the south goes up, invades, kills Laodice, collects all the gold and silver and everything else they can find, carts them back to Egypt. And verse 9 predicts there's going to be a revenge attempted by Syria. Verse 9. Then the latter, which is the king of the north, will enter the realm of the king of the south, which means the king of Seleucia or Syria will come to the south to Egypt, but will return to his own land. And so in 240 BC, the king of the north attacked Ptolemy III in Egypt for revenge. He was defeated and returned home. So the first time the Egyptians attacked, they were successful. The second time they attacked, they were not successful. Verse 10 then predicts that the king of Assyria's sons will attack Egypt. So this is, and you have to get the picture of what's happening here. Seleucia or Syria is up in the north, Egypt's in the south, constantly going back and forth, battling each other. And every single time they're running right through Israel, through Jerusalem. And so Israel was having a very difficult time of it. Verse 10 then predicts that the king of Syria's sons will attack Egypt. So the king of Syria's sons in the north will attack Egypt in the south. His sons were Seleucus III and Antiochus III. Of course, Seleucus III didn't live very long. He was assassinated. But then from 219 to 216, so there were 3 years. It was called the Syrian War. Antiochus III made several campaigns against Egypt. So for 3 years, North Army travels down through Israel, fights against Egypt. They go back home. Next year, they come back down again, travel through Egypt, through Israel, fight Egypt, go back home. They did that for 3 consecutive years. Then in 217 BC, Antiochus III fought Ptolemy at Raphia. Now, here's what's interesting. Antiochus is from the northern kingdom, Syria. Ptolemy IV is from the southern kingdom, Egypt. So here's Syria, here's Egypt, and they fought. And you know where they fought? Right in the middle. They fought at what the town was called Raphia. That town still exists today, by the way, and you've heard of it in the news. Today it's called Rafah. It's in the Gaza Strip. And so here's a northern kingdom from Syria fighting against the southern kingdom from Egypt. And where do they meet to battle? Right on the coast of the Mediterranean in what is today the Gaza Strip, right where Israel is. So this horrendous battle takes place. Antiochus III, the king of the north, was defeated by Egypt. Now, the last 2 times, the first battle he was successful, the second battle he wasn't, third battle he was defeated by Egypt, and then they had to settle for peace, which they did over and over again. That's what you hear that's happening today in all those nations around Israel. They're all talking about, well, let's do something and come up with a peace plan. They've been trying to make peace there for centuries. It's never happened yet, and it's never going to happen. The only thing that is ever going to bring any kind of a peace plan that will seem like it's going to work, and it won't, is when the peace plan that starts the tribulation period is signed. That'll be a 7-year peace plan. But other than that, there's this, they make peace and then they fight. They make peace and then they fight over and over and over again. Still the same today as it's been for thousands of years now. Okay, verse 11 then predicts that Ptolemy IV will be victorious in this battle. Verse 11, then the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter, which is the king of the north, Syria, will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. And so this massive army from Seleucia or Syria comes down to Rafah in the Gaza Strip. The Egyptians come up. The Egyptians come up. The king of the north figures, I've got this powerful army, but he didn't. He lost. And so the Ptolemy and the Egyptians were successful. Verse 12 then kind of flips the script a little bit. Verse 12 verse 11 predicts Ptolemy IV is going to be victorious. Verse 12 predicts that Ptolemy IV, even though he's victorious, he did not pursue the Syrian army. He could have devastated them. Look at verse 12. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall. And so here's the king of the south, enraged that the Syrians in the north would even think of fighting them anymore. He defeats the Syrians, and when the battle was over, the Syrians start retreating back north to Syria. The Egyptians could have followed them and destroyed them, but he didn't. And you'll remember last week I mentioned Ptolemy IV was lazy. And so he didn't want to be engaged in battle anymore. He figured, we beat them. They know we're better than them. And so he turned around and they all went back home. 204 BC, Ptolemy IV dies, and Ptolemy V becomes king. Verse 13 then predicts that Syria will attack Egypt. So remember, if you're keeping score, it's the Egyptians have defeated finally the Syrians. Now it's time for retribution. The Syrians are going to attack Egypt. Verse 13. The king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will pass on with a great army and much equipment. And so in 202 BC, Antiochus III began a series of attacks against Egypt. Verse 14 then gets a little bit intriguing because it predicts that there would be great unrest in Egypt. Look at 14. Now in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. And this is in Egypt. There were people in Egypt that rose up against Ptolemy. Then it goes on, it says, the violent ones. Now remember, the angel is telling Daniel all of this. All of chapter 11. Daniel's hearing all this. I don't know how in the world he was able to keep track of all these things going back and forth, and kings coming and kings going and fighting and battles. But this angel's telling him all these things. And then he says this in verse 14. He says, in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south. So he's saying, down in Egypt, there is going to be a lot of turmoil because people in Egypt don't like the king of Egypt. They're going to rise up against him. And then he says this, the violent ones among your people will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision. The violent ones among your people. Who are Daniel's people? The Jews. Daniel's being told that when all this battling's going back and forth, down in Egypt there's going to be unrest. People are going to rise up against their own king, and a lot of Jews are going to join them, which doesn't turn out well. So he says, the violent ones among your people also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Many Jews joined Antiochus III against Egypt, and many Jews died as a result of it. Then in verse 15, the angel predicts the Syrian defeat of Egypt. Egypt became weaker because of all the infighting and the fact that the Syrians were being helped by the Jews. And Syria finally defeats Egypt. In verse 15, the king of the north will come and cast up a siege ramp and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength left. There will be no strength to make a stand. In 200 BC and 199, so it's 2 years in a row, Syria, under Antiochus III, who is now in control, with the help of the Jews, this becomes a problem. And this well-fortified city, by the way, that they're talking about, is the city of Sidon, which is a port in Israel. And then verse 16 predicts Antiochus III, king of the north, will overcome Ptolemy V, king of the south, and he will control Israel. Verse 16. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. So the he there says in verse 60, he who comes against him, the he is Antiochus III from Syria, the him is Ptolemy V from Egypt, and so Antiochus comes against Egypt, and he's very successful. He who comes against him will do as he pleases. No one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land. Guess where the beautiful land is? It's Israel. Antiochus's forces come down. They pass right through Israel. They go down to Egypt. They defeat the Egyptians. And when they come back north, they look at Israel and say, you know what? This is not a bad vacation spot. And so they stayed there. And so now you have living with remember the Jews joined Antioch to fight against Egypt. And the Syrians are saying, you know what? You helped us. We're going to help you. We're going to settle right here. And so a lot of the Syrians stayed in Israel. So he who comes against him will do as he pleases. No one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in a beautiful land, which is in Israel, with destruction in his hands. You see, when Antioch stayed in Israel, he assumed control. And so the very Jews that helped him defeat the Egyptians now become subject to him. Antioch moves into town and says, we're here, we're setting up camp, and by the way, I'm boss. And one of the ways that bosses always conducted business in those days, in fact, they still do it today, they raised taxes. And so they began to tax Israel. Now, to be honest, at first, when Antioch assumed control of Israel, at first he was fairly generous. He did impose taxes, but they were low. And he was trying to make the Jews think that he was a good guy. And so he actually gave money to help fix up the temple in Jerusalem. So here's a Syrian king devoting funds from the treasury. Of course, the treasury was coming from Israel anyways. Syrian king devoting funds from the treasury in Israel, giving it to the Jewish leaders and saying, here, put a new coat of paint on your temple. So he was helping them to fix up the temple. Problem is, that wasn't going to last. You see, verse 17 depicts that Antiochus will attempt to control the Egyptian throne by marriage. And this happened over and over and over again. Look at 17. So this is talking about the king of Syria, the Seleucid Empire. He will set his face to come with the power of his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him, meaning the king of the south, the daughter of women to ruin it. The daughter of women to ruin it. Antiochus is trying to expand his kingdom. And so in order to expand his kingdom, and by the way, he was starting to come in conflict with Rome, that Rome was starting to become a greater power at this time. In 198 BC, Antiochus conquered part of the kingdom of Pergamum, which today is in western Turkey. The next year, 197 BC, he defeated the Greek cities in Asia Minor, which is all the rest of Turkey. Next year, 196 BC, he entered Thrace. Thrace was the southeastern area of Europe and northeastern Greece. So you got to remember, here's Antioch. Here's Syria over here on the east. I know it's backwards from where you're at. Over here to the west is there's Turkey, and then there's Greece, and then there's Italy. So Antioch comes over, he takes Turkey, moves over, he takes Greece, and here the Romans are sitting in Italy thinking, it doesn't take a genius to figure out who's next. And so the Romans are rising in power, and they are fearing that the Syrians are going to attack them, and so they have to do something about it. So what happened was several times Rome had sent ambassadors and commanded Antiochus to stay out of Europe, stay out of Asia Minor. So Antiochus is coming over. He takes over Western Turkey and then Eastern Turkey. The Romans send a message, you better stay out of Europe. He says, okay. He goes further west and he takes over Greece. They send him more messages, you better stay out of Europe. He was refusing to listen to any of these warnings by the Roman Empire. And by the way, that's at this time in history, that was not a smart thing to do because the Roman Empire was growing in power. They would soon become a massive empire. And so that conflict was amazing in history. And the people that were involved in that conflict, I guarantee you know them. And I'll tell you who they were next week. So we've got like 1 minute, maybe two. Any questions, comments, thoughts? A lot of history. I know it's a lot of history, but it's important. It's critical because all of this happened in the order that it was predicted and to the time, the places, events, and the people. Every one of them filled perfectly. No questions, comments? All right, let's have prayer, and then I think it's coffee downstairs. Thank you, Father, for our time together, for the amazing detail that's found in the 11th chapter of Daniel, which, even though Bible critics have said there's no way of possibly could have been written beforehand, we know that it was because you knew exactly every one of these events, people, places, and things that were going to come to pass. And so you were revealing them to Daniel, and we today have the privilege of seeing how they were revealed. And we give you thanks and praise for this in Jesus' name. Amen.